Technical stuff. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Chemmie Sokolic. I am here to talk to you today about environmental due diligence. A little bit of housekeeping, first of all. If you are able to have your cameras on, I would appreciate it. It's always nice to talk to actual real people, as opposed to just blank screens. Otherwise, I'm just talking to myself, and I don't want to talk to myself. My kids already tell me that I talk to myself too much. So if you want to put your screens on, that would be great. Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Um, that's the first thing. The second thing is, as we get going, if you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I will try to monitor the chat as I talk. If I miss your questions, Jennifer will interrupt me. But feel free to put it on the chat or just interrupt me because that's fine. The primer that we have for you today is about half an hour, give or take, but I may expand that depending on time and depending on the questions that come up. So we'll try to keep this flexible. All right, so let's dive right on in. Hopefully you guys should be able to see my screen. And basically, in a nutshell, for the next 30, 45, 60 minutes, this is what it's going to be all about. Look before you leap. That's it. That's due diligence. And I'm done. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed the class today. That's pretty much it, right? Look before you leap. In a nutshell, that's what we're all about. So before I go talk about who I am and all the details, I'm going to tell you guys a story. This was a real. I personally, I like movies, all types of movies. Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is one of my favorites, Clint Eastwood classic. And I got three case studies for you today. We're going to start with The Ugly. And if we have time later on, we're going to talk about the good and the bad. Let's talk about The Ugly. What do I mean by The Ugly? Well, this is a case study that happened. This is one of my projects that happened about 18, 20 years ago, something like this. And my client was trying to sell his property. This is the property that you have in front of you. This is a real property that someone, commercial property, was trying to sell. So he calls me and he said, Chemmie, I need your help. I'm trying to sell my property. Someone just came in, did their due diligence. They did a phase one and a phase two, which I'll explain a little bit about what those are. But they did their due diligence. They took some samples, and they found a tremendous amount of contamination. And now they've pulled out the deal, and now I can't sell my property. Help! So I was like, okay, well, tell me a bit more about what's going on. What did they find? What was the property? When you bought the property and you did your due diligence, what did they find? Like, what did you find? And he talks to me, he's like, what do you mean when I did my due diligence? It was an investment property. I didn't need to do any due diligence. It was just an investment property I bought 10 years ago. So I said, all right then. And I started digging a little bit. And this is what it was. The property was, there was tremendous amount of contamination that they found. They found contamination in the soil. They found contamination in the groundwater. There were, I know there's a lot of numbers and letters here in front of you, but perchloroethylene, trichloroethylene, basically dry cleaning, chlorinated solvents, dry cleaning compounds, as well as benzene and lead and stuff that is from like petroleum. So I start digging, I see what went on at the subject property. Turned out that the property used to be not one, but two dry cleaners, a carpenter shop, an auto repair facility, and a gasoline filling station. Like if you had to tell me the worst types of contamination or the most likely previous operators that could be on this property, that would be a great. Let me give you guys a little. I don't know. Well, you know what? Yeah, I'll tell you now. If I had to ask you guys, what do you think the most likely, the biggest types of contamination right now in America, the biggest impacted properties they're called Superfund sites. We're going to get to this in a little bit, right? You may or may not be familiar with Circular Superfund. The biggest source of new Superfund sites in America, if I was to ask you what type of property could impact what type of use could impact a commercial property the worst? People say to me, metals, petroleum, PFAS, different types of things like that. Dry cleaners. Dry cleaners are worst, the most likely to be the most contaminated and cost you the most amount of money to clean up. But we're going to get to that in just a minute. In any case, that's what this property, what used to be. And the buyers that came in did their due diligence, took these samples, and found out that it was contaminated. And it gets worse because not only was this contamination underneath the property, it was a plume. It was like a big mass of contamination, and it was moving. And it was moving to the adjoining properties. And what the adjoining properties were was school and residences. And meanwhile, this contamination is emitting vapors and is getting into the building, and these people are breathing it in. And the children are breathing in this contamination. This contamination, amongst other things, is carcinogenic. And here's the kicker. Who's responsible to fix this? Who is responsible to remediate this contamination? My client, the owner of the property. Even though he didn't put it there. He didn't even know what it was. He had nothing to do with it. This happened years before he ever bought the property. And yet he is responsible for the contamination. And we're talking, well, certainly 6 figures, and most likely 7 figures, maybe even 8 figures of remediation costs. And so in a nutshell, what we're here to talk about today is how do you, as brokers, protect your clients? What should you be, you're not expected to be consultants, but what should you have in your mind as you are working for your buyers, for your sellers, for your tenants? What do you need to know? This is just a primer. I'm going to give you like a quick half-hour introduction to due diligence. Certainly, you may have other questions after this. That's in a nutshell what we're going to be talking about today. So let's dive right in. So we spoke about the case study. I'm going to talk a bit about who I am. Why am I here? Why am I talking to you? We're going to talk about why people perform due diligence. I've already given you some idea about that, but there are other things as well, other reasons why someone want to do due diligence. We're going to talk about the types of due diligence that exist, when you need to do the due diligence, and when you should start thinking about due diligence. When should your clients have this in mind? I'll get to that later. And then what happens if you find a concern? The single most important thing, or the wrench, the spanner in the works that a lot of brokers tell me is, oh, Chemmie, I don't want to do due diligence. We might find something. We might kill the deal. I don't want to know about your due diligence because I don't want to kill the deal, because if we kill the deal, then we don't get paid. So I don't want to know about that. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about why not only is that wrong, but it's like completely counterintuitive. And we'll be talking about what happens if you do find a concern. And then finally, we'll be talking about why you should care. Why, as brokers, am I talking to you today? Isn't this your client's responsibility? What responsibility do you have? Why is this important to you? Finally, then, if there's time, we'll be talking about 2 other case studies to give you a little bit more color, about a bit more meat on the bone about what we're talking about today. And of course, there'll be time for questions. All right, so I am trying to also, I'm going to be looking at the chat to see if there's any questions from time to time. So if I'm distracted a little, that is why. All right, I'm not here to talk about me. Here to talk about due diligence, but it is, I think, important to know who I am so that I know somewhat about what I'm talking about. I have a few degrees. I have 2 science degrees, but I also have an MBA with a real estate concentration. So I'm very much business-minded as well as science-minded. I also have a New Jersey real estate license, and I hang my license out Wolf Commercial Real Estate down here in southern New Jersey in Marlton. But I've worked with other brokers throughout the state and beyond. I also have other qualifications. I think one of the key certifications or qualifications that I have talking to you today, I'm going to be spending a lot of time about phase 1 environmental site assessments. You may or may not have heard about phase 1s. I would assume, I hope that you have, but having done this presentation before a few times in front of brokers, I'm always surprised that sometimes there are brokers that don't know about basic environmental due diligence, so the phase one environmental site assessment is which I'll be talking a little bit about more in a second, but it's the due diligence assessment, the key one that is done throughout America. I was one of the people that wrote that standard. I was the final editor of the phase one standard, and I am one of seven people who are qualified, certified by ASTM to train other people how to understand the standard and how to do phase ones. So someone recently said to me, one of seven people globally, it's like, wow, Chemmie, you're literally one in a billion. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. I'm one in a billion. But so I know phase one's like the back of my hand. Having said that, I'm still learning. Every day, still learning, trying to get a little bit more smarter and a little bit more experienced. I also help prepare there's a new ASTM Certified Environmental Professional certification that came out very recently, just last year. I help prepare for that and I help write the exam for that. So I've been doing this for over 25 years. I've done all sorts of properties, commercial, industrial, multifamily, vacant, all types. Although I've done work in many states across America, I specialize in New Jersey. I know that the people who are on the call today, some of you focus in New Jersey, some of you may focus in other states. New Jersey is very specific, and I'll go into why a little bit later on. And I've worked for large regional companies, national companies. And now I have my own shop, which I run. Um, and I've spoken at trade shows, I've been published, and all this sorts of stuff. I've got plenty of papers out there. Check me out on LinkedIn for more information about me. Okay, what do I do? So a couple things that are basically what I do, and this it sort of aligns. I am a consultant. Primarily, I've been doing environmental consulting for 25 years, but like I said, I've also got a sales license, and so I help my clients evaluate their properties. What am I getting into? Am I going to be buying a lemon? Or am I how if I'm trying to sell my property, how can I maximize my asset and get the most amount of money for that? And we'll talk about that. Because obviously, if you're working for the seller, you want them to sell for the most amount of money. Good for them, good for you. So how do I maximize my asset? I identify risks. What am I getting into? I also help brokerages, consulting companies, law firms do what they do to make them look good in front of their clients. Separate of that, by the way, I also do technical communication and training, public speaking, technical report writing, internal and external communication. So I have a few hats. I like to keep myself busy. I really enjoy doing what I do. All right. It's a little bit about me. Again, it's not about me, it's about the due diligence. So let's just dive right in. So why do we perform due diligence? Well, I've already given you some sense of it, right? You buy it, you own it. Whatever contamination is there, you're responsible for it. And what is that? Why does that exist? Now, again, this is a primer. This isn't going to be a huge in-depth law discussion. I'm not an attorney, although I do train attorneys. I think the key law that everyone here needs to know about is CERCLA, the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act, which is very difficult to say when you're drunk, which is why they shortened it to CERCLA or Superfund. Superfund meaning it's a bunch of money that people put in so that you can, long story, doesn't matter. What you need to take from CERCLA is this is a law that came out in 1980. You know it's 1980, by the way, because that's the same year that Pac-Man came out. And it's the same as Pac-Man, and that Pac-Man, you're going after ghosts to figure out what happened in the past. Well, Circle is exactly the same thing. You're going after people. It gives the government the power to go after entities that contaminated properties. So when you buy a property, you're on the hook for whatever is there. Whatever contamination, whether you put it there or not, it doesn't matter. Circular is retroactive, which means that it goes back in time, even before you bought the property. It's also joint and several liability, which means that even if there's a little bit of contamination there that you did, but there's a lot of contamination overall, you're on the hook for everything. So, and there's more to talk about circular, but the thing to take away is that circular is an incredibly powerful law that gives the government an incredible amount of power to go after those polluters. And if you own the property, then you're on the hook for whatever contamination is there. So, what's a buyer to do, right? By the way, this applies not just to buyers, but to people who are renting the property. So if you're operating at the property, you're not even buying it, you're just leasing it. You're on the hook too. You are also responsible, which always like shocks people. Like, what? I'm just renting. Why should I be responsible? I didn't buy it. It's not my property. It's the landlord's issue. Sorry, guys, that's not how it works. 2002 Brownfields Act and then the 2018 Build Act confirmed and confirmed again that not only are owners responsible for whatever's there, but tenants are also responsible for whatever's there. And so what is a buyer to do? What is a prospective tenant to do? How do they protect themselves to say, listen, I want to buy this property, I want to operate at this property, but I don't want all this risk. That's where due diligence comes in. That's why you do environmental due diligence. You do environmental due diligence to find out what's there and to say, hey, listen, yeah, I know that there's stuff there, but it wasn't me, and I've got a report to prove it. And in a nutshell, that's what I'm talking about today, is doing your due diligence to find out what's there. Even if you find out what's there, you can still buy the property. You're still somewhat protected depending on the nuts and bolts, the details. But in a nutshell, generally speaking, you've got some measure of protection called landowner liability protections, LLPs, which again, in a nutshell, when you perform what's called all appropriate inquiry, your due diligence, you say you have a report to say, hey, listen, yeah, there may be some stuff on the property, but it wasn't me. Or, hey, I did my report. There's nothing on the property. I don't need to worry about it. Either way, you've got some measure of protection. That is circular. Okay, that's the one big takeaway from, I think, this slide. But I think other things to think about as brokers, again, if you're operating in different states, in different areas, is sometimes in addition to circular, which is a federal law, there are also state laws which you need to be aware of. So there's the New Jersey Spill Act. There is ISRO, which is the Industrial Site Recovery Act. These are New Jersey specific laws, which I'm not going to go into too much detail right now. Certainly, I'm happy to talk to you guys if you have any specific questions about it. But in a nutshell, ISRA, for example, this is something that if you do any work in New Jersey and you do any work with any commercial property that could be maybe industrial in nature, I'm talking warehouses, manufacturing, light manufacturing, heavy manufacturing, any of that, you need to know about ISRA, because ISRA is that I'm not even talking about if you're buying a property. Now I'm talking about if your client owns a property. And if they're subject to ISRA, which is, again, this New Jersey environmental law, they are on the hook to do their due diligence as a seller. As a seller. As brokers, you need to understand state law. Now, I don't expect you to understand, this is just a primer, right? But what I do is I help my clients understand what they need to do, both as buyers and as sellers. More often than not, what happens is that people call me at the 11th hour when it's a day or a week before closing, and they say, hey, the buyer just said that we're ISRA subject. If you're working for the seller, what do I do? Now we can't sell the property, or now we have to do more investigation, and now the deal can't go through for another 6 months or a year, or maybe never, right? After months and months of negotiation. What you don't want to see happen is to work on a deal for weeks or months on end and then be surprised before closing about something that you should have known about ahead of time. So as a broker, you need some idea, some knowledge about what could happen, even if you're not consultants yourselves. So that's the laws and the regulations. There's also risk analysis, right? Just for even forgetting the laws. What about just general risk for your client? What are you walking into, right? Oftentimes, your client is buying a property. They think they're getting a great deal. And then once you do your due diligence and you find, hang on a sec, the whole HVAC system needs to be replaced. Maybe you need to spend another $100,000 or $250,000 or whatever it is on electrics or plumbing or what have you. Maybe the deal that the client thinks is getting is that it's not such a great deal. So it's risk analysis. What was the property? What is the property now? What about the adjoining properties? Risk analysis. What's your client going to be walking into? And again, as the seller, how can you what is a buyer likely to find? For example, in that case study that I gave you at the beginning of the webinar today, if my client had done his own due diligence, he would have been able to know what was on his property before going through all that due diligence, letting the buyer do due diligence, and maybe he would have been able to clean it up himself and sell the property much more money, much quicker. Now, who knows? And then basic information, how can I maximize my asset? And then, obviously decision making as a buyer, as a seller, as a renter, what should I be doing? Okay, so there's different types of due diligence. Again, this webinar is just a primer, just to give you some idea about the sort of stuff that's out there. There's environmental due diligence. Obviously, that's basically what I'm going to be I'm talking to you about today. There's phase ones, there's state-specific due diligence. I'm sure you guys have heard about asbestos, lead-based paint, mold, compliance, radon, all sorts of environmental types of laws and regulations that your clients may need to know about. In addition to environmental, there's also building, right? Is my building going to be falling down? What's the nuts and bolts, the mechanical, the electrical, the plumbing? What about energy efficiency? Is it ADA compliant? That type of thing. What else? What other types of due diligence might there be? Land use, right? You don't want your client to buy a property thinking that they could build or develop or expand, only to find out, wait a second, it's on wetlands. Now you can't build what you wanted to build. So doing conceptual site plans, wetlands assessments. I'm just throwing a bunch of ideas out there right now. But knowing, having those questions with your client ahead of time to ask them not just, why are you buying this property, but what are your plans for the property? Because the client's plans for the property, whether they're buying or selling or whatever, refinancing or whatever, those conversations, if you have experience, you'll be able to advise them about the future and what they should be thinking about, not only now, but how to best maximize, like I said, best maximize their asset. I keep on going back to that. And talking about best maximizing the asset is financial due diligence. Are they going to be is the ROI on that property what they expect it to be? All right. So when do you need this? So we've spoken about due diligence. We've spoken about why people do due diligence, some of the laws, regulations. Okay, fine. So now, Chemmie, when do I need to start thinking about this? With my clients, if I get a call from a client, when do I need to start thinking about this? Now, most people think that you only need to worry about due diligence when you're buying a property. Why would you care if you're selling it? Why would you care if you're leasing it? Why would you? So I think now you understand it's not just about when you're buying a property. Certainly that's a lot of liability if your clients are buying property, but you also care if they're leasing because they are also on the hook. Investing, right? Just because you're not operating at the property, maybe it's just an investment property, doesn't matter. If your name is on the deed, if you're involved, again, I'm skimming here. What about lenders, right? How do lenders work? There's a carve out for lenders, but that's a little bit tricky there. So what exactly does that mean? Refinancing. So oftentimes banks need phase ones when you're refinancing. Again, selling the property, how can you maximize the asset? If you're developing, renovating, expanding, can you do what you need to do? Have things changed? Have the regulations changed from when you bought it 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago? What do you need to know today that wasn't even around 10 years ago or so? Litigation, assessing information or gathering. Maybe the client just wants to make a good business decision. Maybe they want to see if as a buyer, can I get a little bit of money off the deal? Operating, as I've already discussed. And my personal favorite is this last one. The nothing to see here reason. What do I mean by that? If I had a nickel for every time my client said, "Oh, Chemmie, I don't need due diligence," It's fine. It's a vacant parcel. It's just an office building. It's just a street. It's fine. There's nothing to see here. Really? Okay, well, let me tell you about the nothing to see here is first of all, it may look fine now, but what was it 5, 10, 20, 50 years ago? Because it's what you don't know that comes back to bite you. And even if the property itself is fine, what about the adjoining properties? Let's say your property is fine, but the upgrading adjoining property used to be, I don't know, a dry cleaner or a manufacturing. And now that it contaminated their property, and now the contamination is moving, and now it's under your property. Well, guess who's on the hook for that? You would think, well, it's not I didn't put it there. It's not even from my property. It's from the adjoining property, right? Okay, prove it. Therein lies the rub, right? You need to do your due diligence just to prove that it's not your responsibility. Because if you don't do that and you buy the property, it's a lot harder, if not impossible sometimes, to prove that you're not responsible for the contamination once you've signed on the dotted line. Again, as buyer or as tenant. So the looks fine to me, nothing to see here. Again, a lot of people, I've done this. I've been in business for 10, 20. I've never heard of an issue. Okay, all right. Well, we can share horror stories then. All right, so when do you need to start thinking about it? I'll give you some options here, right? Well, let's start with this. When should you not start to think about due diligence? Is it after you take ownership of the property, at the closing table, or 1 week before closing? Yes, I think you all can figure it out. It's all of the above. Definitely, it's too late. Once you're, and I've had many calls over the years when it's like 1 week before. Oh my goodness, I just found out the property is ISRA subject, or the buyer found something, or the seller needs to do something. Do not let that happen to you or your clients. So when should you start thinking about it? Right? How early? How early in the process should you be thinking about it? Is it 1 month before closing, at the start of the due diligence period? Maybe even before the due diligence period starts, right? So as you know, there's typically in different commercial deals, we're talking about 30, 45, 60 days due diligence, somewhere around there. Maybe you should start there, maybe beforehand. Actually, I would say it's the last one, when you're first considering the property. Because once you're in the due diligence period, the clock started. Oftentimes what I do is I help my clients before they finish the letter of intent and the contract to look at that contract and see, does it protect the buyer? Does it protect the seller? For example, does the letter of intent allow for sampling at the property? What happens if they find something? Who is informed? What liability is there for different people? These are all things that, as brokers, as real estate attorneys, most brokers and most real estate attorneys are not environmental attorneys or environmental consultants, right? And that's as it should be. You're not expected to know all of this stuff. But a wise broker or a wise real estate attorney knows, hey, what am I missing here? What maybe do I not know that maybe I should just get a double check? In fact, just yesterday, a couple of brokers from my team reached out to me to say, hey, my client's thinking of buying a couple of properties, and this is what they are. Maybe it's buying or selling. I forget what it is, but they have some hazardous substances on their property. What do I need to know? What questions should we be asking the clients? What information does the client need to know, to ask, to do, to talk to their attorneys about? We haven't even gone under contract yet, but just having that conversation, it could be a 15-minute, half-hour conversation. Just having that conversation ahead of time could avoid hours or days or weeks or months of work, thousands and thousands of dollars of wasted money, resources, energy. It's worth talking about as early as possible. So as soon as as an idea emerges about a property, that's a good time to just call me. And if it's, hey, Chemmie, if you call me and I say, you know what, it's too early, or don't worry about it, or it's not, that's fine. I'll tell you. But having these questions in mind, starting to think about it right at the get-go when you're dealing with any commercial property is something that I would strongly recommend to you all. All right. So what if you identify a concern? Ah, the element of surprise. I don't want to be, right? You don't want your deal to be scuppered. So this is something, like I said, always throws off brokers in particular, but also attorneys. Um, well, I will tell you this. My brother-in-law, hates the dentist. And for the longest time, he didn't go to the dentist because he was afraid that they would find something. Well, after 10 years of not going to the dentist, he had some tooth pain. So finally he relented and he went to the dentist and he had to have a bunch of root canals. Obviously he shouldn't have put it off. Just ignoring it, like my client at the beginning of the webinar today, just thinking it doesn't apply, it's fine, I don't want to find anything, I don't want to scupper the deal, I don't want to know about it, la 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 la. That is not a recipe for success. Let's talk about what you can do and what you need to know about. Again, very briefly. There's a due diligence window. So you need to know, what can I do? What am I limited to in that due diligence window? What limited, you don't want to start the due diligence period and find out that now you can't do certain investigations that you wanted to do as the buyer. Or maybe you're working for the seller and now the buyer does uh, comes on site, collects samples, tells the state or tells you that there's contamination. And now before you didn't have liability, but now that you've been told that there's contamination on your property, now you do have liability. Well, as the seller, that's something that you probably should have known before the contract period, right? So know about the due diligence window. That there's sampling that one can do, soil, groundwater, air, etc. That sometimes there's different rounds of sampling. Sometimes you collect soil samples, then you come back, you do groundwater samples. This takes time. This takes money. This is something that everyone needs to know about. Don't be surprised that this exists out there, that, oh my goodness, that we need another month or we need another 2 months. This exists. So be prepared ahead of time as a broker, somewhat knowledgeable about the process. If you're working for, if you, whether you're the buyer or the seller, identifying contamination is not the end of the world. In fact, I would even suggest that it's good as the buyer, for example, if you find evidence of impact or there's issues with the property, you can use it as a part to effectuate your deal, to maybe get some money off the purchase price. So as the buyer, you're going to have some cards, some tools in your toolbox to make a better deal. As the seller, if you do due diligence, know ahead of time what's going to come up, what your buyer might find, and fix it ahead of time, right? Maybe, and if you do find something, it doesn't mean the deal is dead. You can just put some money in escrow and the deal can still go through. So with a bit of creativity and with some communication and with some foresight and with experience, my goal is not to kill deals. My goal is to make deals go through, but to do it in creative ways so that everyone is happy. We've spoken about escrow accounts as well. You can, with the attorneys. In essence, then, due diligence heals more deals than it kills if it's done right. So why should you care as a broker? Well, obviously it's important to your client, right? They can make informed business decisions. There's liability considerations. And like I said, risk and return on investment. Are they getting what they expect to get? So obviously your client, whether they're the buyer or the seller or the operator or refinancing or the developer or the investor, for all of those boxes, it's important for the client to do due diligence, and you need to understand the power of what due diligence can do for the deal and for the client. But let's talk about what it does for you as well. So as the broker, you want to look good. You have also trust and confidence, right? That your client should have trust and confidence in you. You have, if you are even somewhat aware, I did the salesperson license. I know that as brokers, we're not expected to be environmental consultants, but we should know about things like circular. I mean, that's in the exam, and some basic idea about this. You have an obligation to somewhat advise your client to say, hey, maybe you should get an environmental consultant on this deal. And it demonstrates your professional and industry experience. It makes you look good if you give your client wise counsel. Why else? Well, you don't want the deal to fall through, right? You want to get on the same page, buyers and sellers, tenants, communicate, avoid last minute deal killers, which I've seen time and time again. Like I said, opportunities for buyers savings. Once you bought the property, once the contract's done, it's very difficult to go back and ask for anything. Then you're talking about, even if it's possible, theoretically, it's still going to be very difficult and very expensive and a lot of attorney's fees. So doing your due diligence before you buy the property is really the last chance to come to the table to talk. Um, so so it's important to the deal to make sure it gets through. And of course, it's important to the relationship, right? When you're dealing with your clients, I would like to think that the all of us aren't just thinking about one deal. We're thinking about the client relationship, that you want them to trust us. You want for them to come back to you with your next deal and your next deal, and for them to refer you to their friends and their family and their business associates. And so it's important for the relationship. Okay. Do we have time, Jennifer, for a couple of quick case studies? Okay, cool. All right. So I'm just seeing if there's any questions here. No, no questions. Okay. Again, as I'm finishing up now, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself when I'm done, and we can talk about it. Okay. So let me finish on just a couple of other case studies to give you another sense of some stories. Again, the good, the bad, the ugly. We've spoken about the ugly. Now we're going to talk about the good and the bad. So let's talk about the bad. So this is a property that happened a project that I received several years ago. Again, just the basics here. My client was the buyer. He wanted to buy this warehouse property. Now, the owner of the property knew that there was contamination at the property, but they had a no further action letter from the regulatory authority. Basically, a letter saying, yes, there's contamination, but it wasn't our problem. If you can see the slide, let me see if I can do this. All right, so you should be able to see my laser pointer, right? So if you guys can see that there's contamination coming onto the property over here. But the owner had a letter saying, yes, there's contamination, but it's not my problem. My property is fine. There's nothing to see here. It's another nothing to see here project. So my client comes and we do our due diligence, and lo and behold, we find some contamination over here. Now, this contamination was pretty heavy, and it was sort of separate from this contamination. And I was thinking, maybe there's something going on here. I know that the seller thinks that there's not an issue, but what do I think? So we did our due diligence, and what it turned out was that there was a lot of contamination under the property that was not related to this other contamination. And what actually happened was that this property used to be a warehousing, shipping, and receiving facility of commercial and industrial cleaning products from 1963 to 2009. Long story short, there was a bunch of contamination on this property, which if my client would have purchased the property thinking that it was fine because the seller said it was fine, my client would have been on the hook. At some point, either operators would have sold. First of all, someone could have got sick because the operators who were actually there could have got sick. It was a carcinogenic vapors. Number two, even if it was fine when he bought the property, the next guy that buys the property from him, if they were to do their due diligence and find this, he'd be on the hook for it. He owns it. Again, once you own the property, it's you're on the hook for it. So I said to him, look, you can buy this property. And by the way, this was a 1031 exchange. Like, he had limited amount of time to buy this property. He said, I need to buy this. If I don't buy this property, I'm going to lose hundreds and hundreds of thousands of, I think it was like over $1 million or something. I was like, dude, you can buy this property. It's fine. I mean, your choice. Just to let you know, there's probably six figures and probably maybe even seven figures of liability here. So something to think about. Long story short, the buyer pulled out the deal. The seller wasn't very happy with me, but the buyer was very happy with me because I saved him likely six figures or seven figures of liability. And then we ended up buying another property and it was fine. That's an example of how something that could have gone very, very wrong for the client ended up being good for him in the end. And then what about the good? So this is just my last case study. It's a feel-good story that I like to say. This happened over 20 years ago. This was a property in the Bronx. Now, as you can see, it looks like there's a nothing to see here property, right? Just green grass or vegetation. What could be wrong with that, Chemmie? There's no contamination. Now, by the way, this is the Bronx we're talking about. So just to give you some sense about the caliber of property we're talking about, someone dumped their SUV on the property the night before. Their brand, well, I'm not gonna say brand new, but they drove the SUV onto the property. This is what it ended up being the following day. So not the highest caliber. You can see in the background as well, little bit of a rundown area, not the best property in the world. So I came and I did my due diligence and I didn't just look, from afar to see what was going on. I walked onto the property. I did my due diligence. I care. I know. I need to be thorough. And what did I find? I found a big pool of oil in the middle. Now you couldn't see it from the street. It was all almost like more in the middle of the property. It was like this oily goop, like 20 square foot area of oily goop. Like, what is that? Did someone dump something? No, that doesn't make any sense because it was in the middle of the property. Long story short, I did my due diligence, and it turns out that, yeah, fine, now there's no building, but there used to be a building. And back in the day, when they demoed buildings, they used to demo the building into the basement and just cover it up with earth and call it a day. And so what ended up happening was that there were actually some tanks in the ground that would have cost my clients a lot of money to remediate. But they knew about it ahead of time. So now we did our phase two. We did our due diligence. The clients knew what they were getting into. They were able to buy the property. They got some money off the deal, and they turned this, well, let's just say subpar property into this. A beautiful, affordable housing project, Wi-Fi, rooftop gardens, solar panels. You can see how it elevates the whole area. And I really like to think that, this is why we all do what we do. It's not just, yes, we're here to make a living, we're here to make deals go through, but what we can do for our clients, for us, for our communities is something way beyond just a deal. It's helping people short term and long term. And I really do. I just love doing what I do. So for me, this is a great case study of why we're all here. And so in a nutshell, then to wrap it up, as we hit the 45-minute mark on this webinar, yeah, better a routine cleaning now than a root canal later, like I told you about my brother-in-law, right? You may think that, oh, I don't want to think about due diligence, but that's the wrong attitude. I disagree with that. Knowing just a little bit, even knowing who to call, is going to save you and your clients in the long run. It will improve your relationship. It will most likely get the deal through. And if it doesn't get the deal through, maybe that wasn't such a great deal in the first place, and it's best to walk away. So sometimes, you need to know when to fold, know when to hold them, and know when to fold them, as they say, right? And that's what we have. So this is my contact information. Certainly, Jennifer, you'll send out my contact info in afterwards. If you guys have any questions, I'm here for you guys. I'm here for your clients. I understand both the science, the environmental part of it, but also the business part of it. Like I said, as a salesperson, as an MBA, from the business standpoint as well as the science standpoint, I like to think that I understand the whole picture to help you guys out. So that's bang on 45 minutes. If you guys have any questions, I am happy to answer them. Wow, very quiet bunch.
I actually have a question. This is Diane. I'm with CORFAC staff.
Sure.
Who pays for the testing? Who is it? The buyer? Is it the seller? Who's doing the testing and paying for it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically speaking, so there's different phases, right? So the first phase typically is a phase one, which is a non-intrusive investigation. You come, you look at what's on the property today, and you do your historical research, like a CSI type of thing, to see what was in the property and the adjoining properties historically, right? That's normally a smaller budget, and it's non-intrusive, which means that no samples are being collected. You're not digging in the ground. You're not collecting any samples. Typically, the buyer pays for that. Um, I've seen deals where you can negotiate, but typically the buyer pays for that. Then the next step, if the buyer, for whatever reason, thinks that they want to do phase two, which is the sampling section, typically the buyer pays for that as well, but sometimes there's some negotiation depending on the project. So it really it's really a deal, but certainly in most cases the buyer pays for the phase one, and then I would say in about, I don't know, 80 90% of the cases, the buyer also pays for the phase two. But again, there is wriggle room. Like if the seller is really anxious on selling the property, maybe he'll give a deal and maybe he'll put some money towards due diligence for the buyer. That definitely goes a long way. As you guys know, right, the good brokers, if we go in all thinking black and white, this is what's normally done, and so this is the only way to do it. That's a great way to lose clients and not get any deals through. The best most successful brokers are the most creative ones. And so to me, it's about, yes, generally this is done, but in this particular case, with these buyers, these sellers, this property, this location, these objectives, what else could we do? And so it's about communication and being creative, I find. Any other questions? It's a great question. Thank you, Diane. It's funny, I remember doing this presentation one. Now, maybe you guys know a lot about due diligence, and to some time, I remember one time I was giving this presentation, and a broker with 35 years of experience said, I remember she came over to me at the end of the presentation. She's like, "Wait a second, Jaime, are you saying that if my client buys the property, they're on the hook for everything, even if they didn't buy it, even if they didn't contaminate the property?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And you've been doing this for 35 years and you didn't know that as a commercial broker? Like, what? But at the same time, some commercial brokers are really savvy and they're like, "Oh yeah, Chemmie, I know most about this stuff." And so hopefully today I've hit, depending on whether you're a junior broker or more veteran broker, there's always more to learn about. There's always more questions to ask. And like I said, I think the devil's in the details. Oftentimes every single deal is different. So it's a case by case basis. I see no more questions, so feel free to reach out to me, connect with me on LinkedIn. Like I said, I work at Wolf Commercial Real Estate in Marlton, New Jersey. But I'm happy to help any of you guys whenever, however I can help. I'm here for you guys. So be in touch.
Thank you so much for the great presentation.
Have a great day, guys.